Greetings and welcome to our daily Devo for Friday, September the 8th. I hope you don't mind. I don't know if the phone recording is picking up the sounds of fans, but it's warm up here in my office where I record these, and got a window open over here, and the sounds of summer, somebody working in the yard, are out there as well. So I hope that doesn't distract from concentration on my part or yours. Today's devotion is entitled The Question About Fasting. And again, there's multiple passages that'll be included in the posting of this from Matthew 9, Mark 2, Luke 5. The quoted verse for today is Matthew 9:14. How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast? And they're focused on an old practice of doing things, old familiar religious practices. They're going to have to be tweaked now, though, with a new day of Jesus coming and him being there, and the transformation that's about to take place in the realm of faith and spirituality. Jesus had not come to change everything, nor had he come to leave everything the same. Old and familiar practices were bound to change, including fasting. Fasting was the intentional abstaining from food and drink during the daylight hours. It was only required on the Day of Atonement, Leviticus 23:26-32, but was widely practiced at other times as well. Fasting highlighted mortal vulnerability and focused the mind on the Lord's provision. So, people fasted when grieving, 2 Timothy 1:12, when praying about significant changes in life, Ezra 8:21, and when seeking assurance of forgiveness, Joel 1:13-15. Jesus fasted prior to engaging in public ministry, Matthew 4:2, and the early church followed suit, Acts 13:2-3. In this passage, Jesus uses three metaphors to comment on not only fasting, but all familiar religious practices. His disciples did not fast on a schedule like the Pharisees or John's disciples, as far as that goes. There was a reason for that. There was a special era when God himself walked among mortals. This was a special era when God walked among mortals. This era was more like a wedding than it was a funeral. So why would they fast, treating it as something it was not? Some practices just had to change. Jesus expands the conversation beyond fasting to include all familiar religious practices. His listeners could not take something they had always done and assume that it would fit seamlessly into this new era. That would be like patching an old garment with a new patch. Because the old and new material would shrink at different rates, the old garment would be damaged again when washed and dried. The old garment had to be discarded, not repaired. The same was true of an old cracked wineskin. Wineskins were containers made from animal skins whose openings were sewn shut. Small holes were strategically placed in the skin to allow fermentation gases to escape while keeping the fluid within. When a wineskin had become old, it lost its elasticity. It needed and would rupture if it lost the elasticity. Pardon me here. When a wineskin had become old, like I am, it lost the elasticity it needed and would rupture during the fermentation process. Jesus' point? Some religious practices needed to be discarded. like a damaged garment or old wineskin, because they simply did not transition into the New Testament era. From our vantage point, that should make sense. Not that everything that was done and believed in the Old Testament, that none of it mattered anymore, because what we see in the New Testament is built on a foundation of truths in the Old Testament. It's the religious practices that were an issue. They were given as the law, and many treated them as law that could not be left behind. We had to live this way. It shows itself in the early church when those who were Jews in Jerusalem that day of Pentecost became followers of Jesus, and then they heard that others who weren't Jews were becoming followers of Jesus. They were trying to mandate they must first go through Jewish practices. They must, if they're men and they're Gentiles, if they're going to be in this church, they've got to be circumcised. I don't think you get many church members that way. If they were going to become church members, they needed to do the fasting. They needed to do all the stuff they did, because that was obviously what the Lord wanted, because he started with them. Dead wrong. Dead wrong. And Jesus was trying to prepare them for that, giving them these illustrations that if you try putting what I have brought, this gospel, this kingdom of the gospel, or gospel of the kingdom, I should say, if you try to fit them together, one of them's going to blow up, and it's going to be the old ways. I love it. I love it. That old covenant was under the law, and the understanding was even though it was given by God, it did not deal with the sin nature. The laws had to be kept in human strength, and that wasn't, they began to see their law keeping as their way to please God. And I guess part of it was, but it's certainly not the way to salvation. For that it would be a salvation of works. Jesus came, he tells everybody, I came to fulfill the law. All of what the Old Testament Jews had been given was in preparation for Jesus coming and fulfilling it, being the sacrifice that would take away the sins of the world, being the high priest who would gain them access into the Holy of Holies, each one not dependent on a priestly class anymore. And so Jesus is preparing them for that, mostly preparing his disciples. Some of those Pharisees would, we read about it in Acts, would begin to follow Jesus and understand. Paul being the primary one of those, he was a Jew of the Jews. He said, I was trained, I was grown up, I was rising in the ranks, and then I realized all of that was worthless. We need to realize that too, that all of our own self-efforts and keeping of laws, keeping the rules and regulations does not get us to glory. Jesus takes care of that for us. And so the question about fasting was, yes, I believe fasting still should happen. For the same kind of reasons listed here, for the grieving, for changes in life, for forgiveness, in a repentant kind of manner, to grieve of your sin and to fast, to spend time totally focused on what the Lord will say as we repent. Blessings to you today on this day, and may our religious practices, as it were, may they be completely geared in grace and thankfulness for the Lord's goodness and mercy to us, not because we have to, but because we want to. Blessings to you.